Imagine if somebody came up to you and said, "Hey, you seem pretty cool. You wanna drop by later maybe and check out my dungeon?" How do you picture that? Personally, I'm fully expecting it to involve nipple clamps and be like this. But in a game, a dungeon could be anything. A forest, a tower, internal organs, or worst of all, a university campus. Now, I know, using the word dungeon like that all started with Dungeons and Dragons, and it's just a catch-all term to describe where the adventure takes place, right? But the word undeniably has a much creepier connotation in real life than it does in most games, and that got me thinking a little bit. Aside from the big hits, like The Binding of Isaac or Darkest Dungeon, what kind of dungeon crawlers are out there that really lean into that sinister feeling and actively try to disturb the player? You know me. I love first-person exploration. Shin Megami Tensei has its fair share of bizarre locales, but I wouldn't necessarily call them frightening. Even if I'm wandering the shores of hell all alone, it's hard to really feel afraid when I have a shotgun and 12,000 life stones. How about something where you're really struggling to get by? In a confusing labyrinth that's quiet and dark, where the monster lurking inside poses an immediate threat to your life, and you have limited ways to fight back. A hybrid between first-person dungeon exploration and nail-biting survival horror. Does something like that exist? Yeah, it sure does. And look whose name's on it. I should have known. The only thing that follows me around more than the Atlas logo at this point is this guy at my local GameStop who says I look like his dead brother. In June 1998 in Japan, Atlas published Dark Messiah for the PlayStation. A first-person horror game where the player is continuously stalked by a monster after becoming stranded in a massive complex beneath Tokyo known as the Mesh. This sprawling place serves as a home to a wide variety of criminals, outcasts, cultists, and opportunists seeking a new life. And it's not quite as simple as you'd like to get back to the surface. Unfortunately, the game was never brought to the United States, but playing it today in English isn't a problem, because believe it or not, on December 30th, 1999, practically right at the end of the 1990s, it was released in Europe with the help of Konami, and they renamed it Hellnight. The game didn't have much of a budget, and it never really got popular anywhere in the world, but you can't tell me it doesn't sound completely badass. Now, what did reviewers think? Well, they gave it pretty much any score you can imagine. Critical reception was completely nuts. It's all over the place. Some reviewers gave it a 6 or 7 out of 10, but then you have this German magazine called Maniac that gave it a 19 out of 100, and another that gave it a 7. Yeah, no, seriously. 7 out of 100. Hello? Did this game burn your house down and kill your family? And then Gamers Republic comes in with the A-. There's no consensus here, none, and I'm sure that didn't help sales. While Atlas and Konami did publish Hellnight, they didn't make it. That honor goes to a company known as Denno Eizo Seisakusho, and I'm willing to bet most of you watching have never heard of them. I sure hadn't, but don't worry. They're not just obscure in the English-speaking world. They don't even have a Japanese Wikipedia page. I think that's kind of crazy. I'm used to it happening when I play old DIY free games, but this is a company that worked with some big names. So check it out. Before we dive into the gameplay, I'm gonna run you through what I could find about the creators. This is one of the most interesting and elusive teams I've ever researched. What I could find paints them as a really creative group of people. This part's gonna be a bit longer than usual. If you want to skip to the playthrough, see the chapters below. Otherwise, let's get into it. Okay, what do you do if you want to know more about a developer and they don't have a Wikipedia page? Well, meet my old buddy Moby. Moby Games, that is. Maybe you already know what this is, but if not, it's a big database with like every game in existence logged on it. The pages have general info and stuff like box art on display, but if we click on developer here, we can see what else they're linked to. What do you think? What else did Denno Eizo work on? According to this site, only 3 other titles. What could they be? You gotta be shitting me, right? They worked on the Shin Megami Tensei ports. Even when I don't play that series, I still run into it. I honestly had no idea. I've never seen anybody else talk about it, and why would they, unless they knew the other niche stuff listed here? It kinda blew me away when I saw it. Aside from that, we've got another really cool looking horror game on the Dreamcast that never left Japan called Desperia, and a cute little RPG for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, another Japan exclusive, on a device I don't think I've seen before today. It's a unique selection, and from what I can tell, that's pretty much it. I found a German website that credits them for smaller roles on a handful of others, but overall, Den-O Eizo's existence in the industry seems to have been very brief, spanning just a few years. Despite that, I still wanted to know a little more about them, assuming the information existed. I was hoping to find some kind of interview with them, and I figured the next best place was the archived copy of their website linked here at the bottom. While it does offer some mundane details that I found kind of entertaining, that's about all it has. It doesn't work the best these days either. It seems to have heavily relied on Flash Player, and it was pretty glitchy for me. You can still get around though if you're patient. This was one of the later copies of the site that was functional. Past 2004, it looks like the domain was sold. From what I can gather, the company was founded in December 1996 and was located in the Higashidogawa ward in Osaka. When I was in college, I actually studied in Japan for a while, and I was pretty close to this place. If only I had the idea a few years sooner, I absolutely would have went looking for where it used to be. This copy I was using mentioned they had 14 employees at the time, and listed a few of their primary customers, Atlus and Sega among them. The site also has a product page for Desperia and Hellnight/Dark Messiah, and a news page that's mostly barren. The page I liked reading the most was the job openings. They were looking for a programmer and a CG designer, and work hours were from 10 in the morning to 7 at night. It had to have been an exciting feeling starting at a place like this, although those hours are kinda tough. I guess that's how it goes. This site is a neat little obscure footnote in history, for sure, but I was really hoping for some kind of big breakthrough. This time, I'd have to resort to drastic measures. We're not talking about old Japanese blog posts or something this time. This is a step further. What I'm getting at here is that I spent like $80 importing old magazines and guidebooks so we could see if they said anything else. If you look at the bottom of the Japanese wiki page for Hellnight, it lists a few sources, like Hyper PlayStation and Famitsu. I couldn't find scans online, so I bought them on Yahoo Auctions. There are probably more European ones out there too, but I figured native language was our best chance at getting more on the company that we don't already know. Okay. Don't get freaked out, but I'm gonna have to show you most of this in real life. I know, reality, right? I can hardly bear it. I don't have a nice scanner or anything, and right after I bought these, I got laid off from my job, so I'm not gonna buy one right now. It's alright, I'll see what I can do about getting these backed up somewhere. Anyway, the first thing I took a look at was this issue of Famitsu Weekly. This is from June 26, 1998. You know, this is a pretty damn big magazine, it's like 200 pages. I'll be honest though, it wasn't a good start. It's cool, but it doesn't really have what we're looking for. On page 36 here, there's a little segment for the game. In stores now. Unfortunately, it doesn't say much at all. Just a basic summary of the premise, and a couple of little gameplay tips. Now, there's actually a much longer and more detailed article on page 120 as well. This one points out at the beginning that you want to play the game in the dark with headphones, and describes it as a new kind of horror revolving around sound. It's pretty nice, it does show a lot of different parts of the game, but seemingly nothing about the devs. There's one more feature about the game on page 176, in my opinion the coolest looking by far, but again, no dev info. I don't even see any mention of Den-O Eizo, they just list Atlus. So for the purposes of this video, I guess this was a bust. I also picked up the July 1998 issue of Hyper PlayStation. This one has a much bigger feature starting on page 131. I like the layout and the way they use the game's art. They even throw in some custom-made maps. It's definitely high effort. They show off different NPCs and areas and share tips, kinda like the last one, but again, nothing about the devs. If you like the game Echo Knight though, there is a fold-out poster for it in here. Well, we're down 2. Should I just give up? No, I got more in me. I didn't see this one linked anywhere, but it's a damn good source. It's not a magazine though, it's a strategy guide. Dark Messiah no Subete, or All About Dark Messiah. They're not fucking around either. This is all about the game. We got story, maps, every NPC, items, concept art. This is detailed to the extreme. I'm pretty sure there are story bits and lore in here that don't even appear in the game at all. There's a timeline, for example, that goes back to the 1800s. This thing is an absolute blast to flip through. There's a section compiling the game's scariest areas and moments, followed by a feature on creepy things to be found in Japan in real life, like old shrines, images of UFO sightings, and, a prison for war criminals. But does it have anything about the developers? You'd think with concept art and stuff it might, right? Well, it doesn't appear to have exactly what I was looking for, a direct interview. But honestly, it might have something even better. Quite a bit of text is devoted to essentially discussing the inspiration for the game's setting, and I think it sheds a lot of light on Den-O Eizo's mindset for the game. Check this out. There are several pages in this guide dedicated to describing the chaotic infrastructure and ironic loneliness of living in Tokyo. Their outlook on the city is pretty bleak, and it's discussed in extensive detail. Like, one paragraph talks about how individuals practically don't exist on a city of this scale. Then there's a part where they say if you stand in a spot near intense traffic, you start to feel a dreadful sense of emptiness and fragility. Like, at any moment, some kind of horrible accident can happen to you, and it would just be drowned out by the constant activity surrounding you. They make mention of gun and knife violence in Tokyo, and even reference the chemical attacks carried out in 1995 by an apocalyptic cult. If you've never heard of that, it was a real thing. It all just kinda exudes this sense of raw anxiety and bitterness. It's pretty fascinating, and might be the most negative description of living in modern Japan that I've ever read. The subway system is described as dull but noisy, and they talk about how the homeless and sick are ignored. It's heavy stuff. So, the devs didn't just make a game about dark and dreary tunnels under Japan filled with outcasts because it seemed like an interesting setting to explore. It sounds to me like it came straight from the heart, and it was quite personal for the team. Now, I don't want to make this section crazy long, right? But there is one more thing I want to show you, because why not? We're pretty far into this. Turns out, that interview I so wanted to find actually does exist. I saved it for last because it comes from a source that isn't even about Hellnight. Dreamcast Magazine, June 23rd, 2000. When Den-O Eizo released their other horror game, Desperia, they got a huge blowout feature in this magazine. And the only reason I know about it is thanks to an excellent researcher and translator named Rio. I'm gonna link their YouTube channel and Tumblr in the description below. Rio is, in my opinion, the definitive source for information online about Desperia, and it just so happens they've translated the entire staff interview in this article, if you'd like to read the full thing yourself. I told you it'd work out if we kept looking. I'm just gonna give you the relevant highlights here because much of the article is related to their design process for Desperia, which we'll talk about in a future video. So first, here's some pictures of the dev team. It's pretty crazy. These guys didn't even have a real office when they started. During Hellnight's development, they say they were working out of a vacant garage. They mention that one of their team members traveled to the US to learn about creating CG effects, and they talk about how important it is for them for players to be immersed in their settings, experiencing things unlike any other game. Now just think about this for a second. I think that garage bit is really important. Their distaste for the isolation of city life has already been established, so to have that as your work environment on top of it all, from the setting of the game, to their anxieties about the real world, to the physical place they did their work, it all comes back to that cold metal and dreary infrastructure. They really weren't messing around. Well, with that, I think it's finally time to jump into this. We're gonna do one full playthrough of Hellnight and see what it has to offer. This is a game with several endings and outcomes. We're not going for anything in particular, although I will break them all down at the end. Let's give it a shot. As we turn the game on, we're shown a pretty damn cool intro. In fact, I'm not even going to talk over the first part. It's better if you just see it for yourself. The tone it gives off is so bizarre and alien. Just about everything you see raises some kind of question. From there, it highlights some members of the main cast. A student named Naomi, some kind of special ops soldier named Ivanov, a dude in a jacket with a handgun named Kamiya, and a cool looking lady named Renee. Then we get a text crawl that introduces the story. We were involved in a subway accident that killed over 50 people. Surrounded by blood and rubble, the presence of something horrible lurks in the darkness nearby. We're now trapped in the Tokyo Mesh, a huge underground shelter constructed by the Japanese army during World War II. Today, a metropolis for followers of the Dark Messiah. The game straight up says after this not to try and fight, because an unimaginable horror is about to begin. And it all ends with this. Get ready.
I see. So, you are the one that will be the next prince of darkness.
Now that's how you do an intro cutscene. Starting a new game, we're shown another cutscene, this one providing a bit more context as to how we got involved in the accident in the first place. At a research facility in Ichigaya, some kind of human-looking specimen breaks free and kills a scientist. It starts stalking the halls nearby, almost like a zombie, where it then jumps out in front of another person and rips them open practically immediately. Things then cut to the city, where there's recently been a series of disappearances at subway stations, suspected to be the work of a cult called the Holy Ring. We see some cultists shouting out an apocalyptic message in the crowded streets, when suddenly, they recognize us and chase us down into the tunnels, where we board a train. You might notice already that there are quite a few typos in this game. Either the translation was rushed, or it didn't have much quality control. Probably a mix of both. Anyway, it's not long before our buddy from the lab is seen standing on the tracks. The train tries to screech to a halt, then it derails, as the creature seems to begin melting into a new form. As we stand up, we're approached by another survivor. It's Naomi, who runs out of the wrecked train with us as the monster starts killing everything in its path, breaking in from the next car down. A quick sprint leads us straight into the sights of an elite Black Ops team, led by Ivanov, who orders us to stand down before the monster crashes the party and eats like 3,000 rounds, giving us a window to escape. Talk about a trial by fire. Shit, I haven't even started playing yet. From here, we find ourselves in a maintenance room, and it's time for our first taste of some sweet Hellnight gameplay. You could basically say the game is split between two modes, investigation and exploration. Let me get you familiar with the former. When you're inside of a room, you're stuck in place, and you can move your cursor around to examine nearby objects or talk to NPCs. If you press circle, you can access your inventory, and if you press triangle, you can leave the room. Most of Hellnight's puzzles boil down to just figuring out what item to use in a particular spot. There's nothing too crazy you're gonna have to do in these segments, so if puzzles aren't your thing, you don't have to worry too much. If you examine the old machinery here, you'll find arguably the most important item in the game, the compass. Like I said, this is a dungeon crawler, so you'll probably want it. There's also a padlocked trap door on the floor, which we're able to bust open by using this crowbar somebody left behind. Beyond the trap door is a really dark staircase that kinda seems to lead straight into the abyss. After going down, we find ourselves in a sewer system. Now that we have a few seconds to ourselves, Naomi starts to panic a little bit and anxiously asks what that monster was, and what those soldiers were gonna do with us, but then realizes we're equally as freaked out and apologizes. She tells us her name and says she was hanging out with some friends and came home late, only to get caught up in this. That's some tough luck. I guess it's time to roll up our sleeves then and find a way out of this maze. Now don't worry, I've played a couple SMT games before, you can trust me. Alright, so, the exploration. The biggest differences Hellnight has from a traditional dungeon crawler are first, there's no combat whatsoever. If the monster catches you, well, you're up shit creek. And second, it isn't tile-based. You have completely unrestricted movement. You can even free look, sprint for a limited time, and swing your head behind you while you're running. Some of you might say, Marshall, you stupid ass, that doesn't sound anything like a classic dungeon crawler. But a lot of things we associate with the genre are in fact present in this game. As you walk around, you fill up an auto map. There are hidden NPCs to be found, and there are even stage gimmicks like sliding floors. Yeah, they put those slip and slide floors in a horror game. Now that's scary. This is one of those things that just feels like it was completely and utterly designed for me to play it. And I'm not the most sane person out there, so I can kind of imagine why reviewers back then had such mixed opinions. Now, if you get lonely while you're walking around, you can talk to Naomi by pressing square and she'll share some thoughts, but you'll want to keep your guard up at all times for reasons I'll explain in just a minute. Not too far from where we come out of the maintenance room, Naomi spots an iron card lying on the ground with some kind of bizarre insignia on it that frightens our character. With no other choice, we're then forced to trudge through the water. The place is dead silent except for some short looping ambient music and a constant dripping sound effect. The game also only renders something like 15 feet of space in front of you, and it seems like you're always facing darkness no matter where you go. If you play this game at like 1 in the morning after a suck-ass day at work like I did, it's pretty unnerving. As we make our way deeper into the tunnels, Naomi suddenly freezes, then gets a terrified look on her face and says we need to leave now because the monster is right behind us. We turn around and suddenly, there it is, as it flops down from the ceiling and seems to land hard on its back. The monster then stands up and looks kinda like Frieza with a pair of pants on. Breathing heavily, it then lunges at us. What you want to do now is obviously immediately start running in the opposite direction. Make sure you hold down the X button to sprint. From here on out, this guy wants to be all up in your shit pretty much constantly. He is dead set on catching us, and overall, there are a few places he can't appear. After you sprint for a little while, your vision will start to wobble around as your heart rate increases, eventually changing to the screen flashing if you keep going, and then being unable to run anymore without taking a break first. You'll want to be careful not to overexert yourself. If the monster catches you, like I said, no good. You know what happens? Naomi dies, forever. And if you get caught again while you're alone, you die. And the only thing you can do at that point is reload a save. You might ask, why even keep playing if you lose Naomi, right? Well, the thing is, there are other people we'll encounter that'll join up with us, but only if we're alone. What ending you get depends on who you finish the game with, so if you want to see all of them, you're going to be intentionally feeding people to the monster sometimes to get a new partner. Kind of morbid. Don't worry though, we'll do our best to get Naomi out of here. After you get far enough away, the monster kind of backs off, and we find a big storage compartment to seal ourselves inside of and hide. The funny thing is, the monster actually does seem to find us, and stands right outside, kinda just huffing for a minute, before starting to walk away. Now, if you just run outside, it might turn around and hear you. How long should you wait? Well, Naomi actually has a special ability where if you look at the map and the monster's close, you can see where it is. It kinda reminds me of an FOE from Etrian Odyssey. After he's gone, we can pass through a door with a shutter on it, and end up in more water that's currently being electrified by a giant loose wire. We don't get close enough to take any serious damage, but now we'll have to find a way to shut it off so we can get through. There's another maintenance room nearby where the old pipes are mysteriously stained in blood, and yet another one with a small key that'll come in handy shortly. Approaching another bend, Naomi again suddenly freezes up and shouts for us to stop, saying that the monster is right around the corner holding its breath so we don't hear it. How the hell do you know that? She's not lying though, it really is there. Holding its breath? That's pretty creepy. I guess it can't be a mindless zombie then. This thing learns fast. Well, one way to get the monster to go away is to enter a room. Any room where you're not actually walking around is perfectly safe, and often, once you come back out, he'll be somewhere else. After getting past him, we reach a set of double doors where we can use the small key we found and find the generator room. Turn off the power by interacting with the circuit breaker, and now that live wire is no longer an obstacle. Beyond it is a big pile of rubble, with a hole just small enough that we're able to squeeze through one at a time. When we pass through, we get another cutscene. Some kid named Razzo comes in out of nowhere and welcomes us to the mesh, the real Tokyo as he calls it. Razzo asks why we're in such a hurry and says we should enjoy the scenery, implying our chances of leaving are pretty much slim to none. Alright, well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. As soon as we get our footing, the ground starts shaking, alarms start blaring, and several security doors slam shut. Maybe they don't like visitors after all. The protagonist realizes there's no going back now, and wonders if perhaps there's some kind of sabotage at play, but there's not much we can really do about it. Pressing forward, we walk down a hallway lined with pillars. I feel like it's pretty menacing. I guess this is essentially an underground fortress. About halfway through, another person just pops up in front of us with no warning and starts asking us what's going on, wondering aloud who could be attacking. At least they don't recognize us as the threat, but that must mean the monster got in too. Naomi yells at the guy for jump scaring us, and then he scuttles away. And a few seconds later, somebody else does it, launching straight into a conversation. Don't you guys say hello down here? This guy, Tachibana, tells us the mesh is in emergency lockdown mode. Unfortunately, nobody living here knows how the systems work because they were built by the military a long time ago, so there's a good chance we're all in a lot of trouble. Tachibana starts to have a breakdown and runs off laughing, and from there, we enter into a big chamber with a large set of doors looming ahead. Behind these doors lies Central Square, a big meeting place with a bunch of people standing around. A man in front of us named Suge says we picked a shitty time to show up, and if we go walking around now, we'll probably die. Cool. He gives us advice anyway, though, and explains that the mesh is divided into 3 floors. The one we're on now is kinda like a residential area. Floor 2 is a production area, and floor 3 is a no man's land that people never seem to come back from. Alright, well, knowledge is power, I guess. Thanks. Another guy named Hoshino doesn't understand why we want to leave in the first place, and reminds us that this place is dark, warm, and free of policemen. He seems excited by all the crazy stuff going on down here, and straight up says we're weird for wanting to go back outside. Then you got this cool guy Leno, who's wearing a pretty sick cloak. He looks like he should be the main character, honestly. Leno asks if we were chased down here by the Holy Ring and tells us about a stairway in the northwest area of this floor that might take us back to the sewers. Last up is Tsunoda, who really looks just like an NPC from the game Kenshi. Any Kenshi fans out there? Tell me he doesn't. To be honest, a lot of these people look like Kenshi NPCs, but I think Tsunoda takes the cake. This guy starts waxing poetic about the wondrous beauties of the mesh, and then tells us about the time he woke up next to the ghost of an Imperial Army soldier who told him to find some documents. Maybe we should keep an eye out for those. Back out in the hallway, yet another person approaches us and says we have a nice compass, then tells us the mesh was intentionally designed to be confusing, and gives us some general tips about using that to our advantage. He basically tells you how to follow directions. Now, to the west of the meeting room is a very, very long hallway with a sealed door at the end, and a few branching paths along the way. You'll want to remember this door. It's gonna be a minute before we can use it, but it's how we'll get to the next area. As we head down the first branching path, Naomi begs us not to go any further, warning that something horrible is waiting. You can actually see a fork up ahead, and you can slip down the left-hand side with no consequence, but it only leads to another sealed door. If you go south, our buddy pops down from the ceiling again, but he lands much more gracefully this time, and seems to have dropped the pants. It only took him like 2 evolutions to lose the slacks. Well, I mean, Naomi did warn us about this, but at the same time, we still have to make progress. If you bolt out of there immediately and sprint back to the meeting area, you should be fine. I swear he gets a little faster every time though. Once you lose him and head down the southern path, you'll find a couple more rooms. One has a really old lady named Inosuke who's pissed off that people are upset about the sirens. Yeah, those damn kids, am I right? They hear a fucking air raid siren and don't know how to act. She seems to have been around since before the war, which makes her much more knowledgeable than most other residents at least, and she reinforces Leno's claim that there's a staircase in the northwest area, saying if we reach the control room, we can actually turn the security system off entirely. The other door down here is just locked. I guess the control room's a good little hint, but I think there's a strong argument to be made that it might not be worth triggering the monster here at all. I mean, I basically just traumatized my only friend just to learn about a room I'd probably find on my own anyway. Now, the other branching path takes us much deeper into the facility. There are some empty living spaces over here, as well as one where we can steal a screwdriver off of somebody's desk. You know, these things are probably worth their weight in gold down here. You better hope whoever it belongs to doesn't just walk right in. Oh well. Beyond these apartments, there are several more hallways available to us. The first one is an area with some weird graffiti, and the monster seems to lurk around near it. There's actually a door in the middle of this box on the map, and he was just standing in front of it when I got there. I had to leave it behind for a bit, but don't worry, we'll come back. The next hall down has an appraisal shop run by a guy named Mole. He reminds me a lot of Rag from the Megami Tensei series. I don't know, they both have weird short names and sit around in the dark looking at stuff we find on the ground. This guy doesn't trade gems though. He'll make comments on the items in your inventory, which is supposed to help you figure out what to do with them if you get stuck. It can also just be interesting to read what he says. For example, you can ask him about the creepy hall pass we found, and he tells us it belongs to the Holy Ring, and it'll give us access to the Mesh's information terminals. Guess what? The first information terminal happens to be next door. These give you a basic rundown of what kind of rooms are in each area. The hallways of this floor are labeled with things like manager's quarters, women's quarters, citizens' quarters, and enlisted men's quarters. Oddly enough, the room in that square seemingly being guarded by the monster is the hospice. Aside from navigational purposes, I guess the takeaway from knowing specifically what all of these areas are supposed to be is this isn't just some kind of temporary bomb shelter. It's cluing you in that the government was really anticipating being annihilated and dumped a lot of resources into the Mesh. This place is like a permanent scar from the war, literally at the heart of the country. Before heading back to the hospice, let's finish up the last of this area. There's a kid wearing an army helmet named Mario lurking around if you take a left after going north past the terminal. Mario's kinda strange. He comments on how busy things have felt since people arrived from the surface, and then offhandedly mentions that someone who was just here shot his friend. I mean, what? That's pretty bad, right? Hey, if you're not tore up about it, I guess I won't be either. That's a crazy story, man. He tells us the shooter's name is Kamiya, which must be the one from the intro. Maybe he's not so cool if he's already murdering people. Going the opposite direction back down the terminal hallway, if you take a right, there's one more important room housing some crazy geezer who thinks the war is still going. Sergeant Okabe here entrusts us with top secret documents passed down from the general. He says he's been watching these since before we were born, but he's tired now, and it's time to pass the torch to a young, healthy officer like us. Kinda crazy how it all just falls into place like that. Well, that takes care of the documents that Tsunoda dude wanted. On our way back, finally sneaking into the hospice, we find a variety of unspeakable things left behind. You got old documents talking about some kind of massive cave-in that killed dozens of people, as well as autopsies showing the presence of mutated, fish-like tissue on the victims. There's even something talking about messed up joints that resemble the ones found in arthropods. There are also X-rays of some unknown being, probably the thing chasing us, which is honestly downright puzzling if you think about it. I mean, the monster wasn't even in here at the start of the game, it broke out of another facility. But these images prove that not only do other people know about it, they've studied it. So they were either moving this thing around, or there's more than one of them. I feel like the monster's most creepy when it shows signs of intelligence, and the fact that it was like protecting this room so we wouldn't see all this stuff stuck with me. Well, from here, we'll want to make our way back to Tsunoda and drop off the documents. Keep your ears open, duck into a room if you need to, and just play it safe. Sometimes it can be tempting to just sprint everywhere in this game once you know exactly where you need to go. But if you push your luck and the monster finds you out of breath, you're likely screwed, so try to be disciplined with the running if you can. Once we hand over the dogs, Tsunoda's happy that he can finally give them to the ghost he keeps seeing, and he gives us a mechanized gate key. Remember when I said to keep that one sealed door in mind because it goes to the next area? Well, that's where this key comes in. Now, check this out. We gotta talk for a second. I don't want you to be mad, but I messed up, and I'm sorry. Look, when I left the meeting area, the monster showed up, and I panicked. I sprinted all the way down that long corridor to the west, frantically trying to reach the gate. He was right behind me, and I couldn't get away fast enough. I exhausted my stamina, and the door was my only salvation. I reached out, unlocked the door, opened it up, and during the animation of it opening, he killed Naomi. Yeah, I kind of thought if I touched it, I'd be off the hook and just allowed to go through, but nope. If the monster's too close, the game doesn't just give it to you without some consequences. Shit, man. I said I'd try my best, and what did I do? I fucked around and found out. Well, you know, Naomi found out. And then they rub it in. You're all alone now. Ugh, I'm so disappointed myself. I kept her alive for literally like 15 minutes. And you know, it only gets harder from here. Now we can't see where the monster is on the map, and nobody's gonna warn us if we're about to walk into a trap. All we have left is our own instincts. Jeez. Well, at least this is the northwest area, where those stairs are supposed to be, so maybe one of us will make it out of here alive. A nearby information terminal indicates this place was intended to be used as additional housing for bureaucrats as well as normal citizens. And there's a bar nearby. Honestly, after losing my only friend, I could go for a drink. Or 10. In the next room down, we can talk to a hippie girl named Mika, who says she's lost her headphones, which were given to her by a guy named Reese. And we can keep an eye out for those too. As you continue to the northern end of the map, you'll reach a point where you can either go left or right. If you turn left, an ominous-looking man named Carino urges us not to go any further, warning that the cultists will get us if we do. I decided to listen to him. Probably don't want to take any more chances. Only later would I realize that path actually leads to the stairs that were supposed to be our ticket back to the sewers. Our supposed salvation was right there. But the game's obviously not that short, and we were right to trust this guy because the cultists actually do hang out over there and will fuck you up. Basically, the easy way out's a trap. If you take a right, you'll come up on a handful of apartments. Inside one of them is this drunk guy named Yamaoka, who's partaking in the most sacred of all human rituals, day drinking in bed. Yamaoka says we should try drinking all the time too because it'll change our life. He says the bar is just ahead and recommends a specific type of vodka called Underground Romance. Back out in the hall, you can look at some more graffiti. I couldn't tell what this was supposed to be at first, but the protagonist seems to think it's depicting a boy kicking around a skull. There's also a big suited dude just kind of standing around there too, giving us a hard stare. He starts talking about a serial killer from the surface who was in the news 2 years ago for killing a police officer. The killer was never found until apparently a few seconds ago when he was spotted in the bar. And guess what his name is? Kyoji Kamiya. So Mario wasn't bullshitting us. There really is a lunatic killer roaming around down here. And that means he must have been on the train with us. As you approach the door to the bar, you'll see it's called Little Jamaica. And for what it's worth, the place is pretty cool. I wasn't expecting much, but it seems like it'd be neat to hang out here for a while. That is, if the Zodiac Killer wasn't here throwing back shots. Right when we walk in, Kamiya immediately spots us with his piercing blue eyes and walks straight up to us, seemingly recognizing us from the train. Our face must give away the fact that we already know he's batshit insane, because he starts pressing us about it, wondering who told us about his identity, before reassuring us that we aren't prey to him. Kamiya seems to fit right in with the people down here and calls the place a paradise, even remarking that it feels familiar to him somehow. He also casually throws out the fact that there'd be a little bit of an issue with letting us go back outside, now that we could potentially expose him. You know what's coming, don't you? Yeah. I can't believe it either. Our new partner is Kamiya. He wants to walk around with us. I think that's so funny. It's like, hey, you couldn't handle keeping this nice girl safe who is super concerned about you. So now you're gonna hang out with a freaky ass murderer. Have fun. Kamiya says we'll have a good time as long as we don't try anything stupid, and now we're stuck with him. There are some other people you can talk to at the bar if you'd like. You got High Woman, who's ranting about how much she hates cultists, and Master Jake, who hands us a full bottle of that special vodka we were recommended. Then there's Depressed Ganges, who says that everyone's been acting weird lately, and finally, Ali, who wishes the cult would kidnap someone who's been annoying him. I'm picking up a lot of negative emotions in here. Living underground in a brick maze might do that to you. Leaving the bar, you'll quickly find that having Kamiya as your partner creates nothing but problems everywhere you go. He threatens to kill that suited man in the hallway, which sends him running off. I guess this could be a good thing, in a way. I mean, I have to admit, it's kinda nice to have someone dangerous on our side. Am I really already getting Stockholm Syndrome for being taken hostage? Continuing to the east past the bar, there's a room with a big dresser that's been bolted to the floor. Now, you can actually unfasten the dresser with your screwdriver, and it lets you move it, which reveals a hidden passage. Inside is an extremely dark and cramped tunnel. If you talk to Kamiya in here, you'll notice he's wearing sunglasses now, and says he hears a cat meowing. What? Forget the cat. Take off the glasses. It's already pitch dark in here. He's dead ass just walking around blind. He has to be. The monster seems to lurk in this passage, but I never actually saw it. I was just surrounded by loud growling and breathing as I made my way through. At the end, we find a door that brings us to the northeast area. This place was designed to hold more enlisted men's housing and apparently process raw materials. Most importantly though, the control room is in this area. On my way over, I found a room with this guy Asada inside of it. He says that we're a little young to be down here, but that all are welcome regardless. Asada then tells us the Holy Ring cult has been kidnapping people, and he says the victims scream from the bottom of their souls like animals when they're being chased. He thinks the cultists are working on a big project, and mentions that some believe they're killing people specifically to harvest their blood. All I can say is they must be pretty damn good if they're getting away with that over and over again. Either that, or it's some government conspiracy and they're sweeping it under the rug. As we get closer to the control room, there's a guy named Sakaki who seems to be having a bit of a breakdown about the monster being loose. In the middle of his ranting, all of a sudden, like he heard us talking about him, the monster flies down from the ceiling and kills Sakaki. He's a bit more aggressive over here. You'll want to be on extra high alert, even after you lose him. Unfortunately, the control room is locked once you manage to get there, so we'll have to head through this corridor to the south and see if we can find anything else. After taking a little ride on a conveyor belt, we reach more apartments, many of which are empty. There's one where you can look at a weird old medallion that makes us nervous for some reason. It seems like there's nothing else you can do with it either. I'm guessing it's some kind of cult artifact. Eventually, you'll reach a point where you can either go left or right. If you head right, there's a storage room where you can smash open a crate and score some Tokyo Mesh Vintage. We're gonna have a fully stocked bar here sooner or later. The path to the left takes us to a gate that actually leads to the southeast area. Now, even though we haven't unlocked the control room yet, we're all good to leave it behind for now. We're gonna have to do a few more things to get in there. The southeast area gave me a pretty rough first impression. The monster appeared right away, and I had to sprint past him in a cramped spot. Out of breath, I stumbled into a door that was thankfully unlocked, and led into a room occupied by Jinbei, another alcoholic. He wants a drink of Tokyo Mesh Vintage, and coincidentally, we just found a whole bottle of it. Hand it over, and he gulps it down, then tells us the door behind him leads to a part of the southwest area we weren't able to reach before. Jinbei then lifelessly plops straight into his bed before we even leave. After another horrifyingly dark and narrow passageway, we cross over into a chunk of the southwest area, which is where we started, that lies behind one of the sealed security doors. There's just a room over here with some headphones. That's literally it. But now we can at least go back and give these to that girl Mika. On our way back through Jinbei's room, we find that he didn't just drift off into a blissful drunken sleep. He, died after that. He did say he had no regrets, and he looks happy. Considering the state of things, maybe it's not such a bad way to go. Now, okay, so I did say we'd be backtracking to Mika, but there's a bit more you might want to explore before you do that. A nearby information terminal shows an emergency elevator not too far from us, as well as more housing and a stairwell in the southeast corner. Like usual, most of these rooms are empty or locked, but one houses Sugiya, who offers to tell us more about the stairwell if we help him out. Sugiya then spins us a familiar story. He lost his headphones. Here's the deal. You have a choice of who gets the one pair of headphones we found. At face value, Sugiya comes off like the obvious decision. Not only did he lose his headphones, he says they were given to him by his now dead father, and they're the only thing he has left to remember him by. It's significantly more dramatic than Mika's story, and not only that, if we just gave them to him now, we wouldn't have to do any backtracking. You might be thinking, okay, obviously it seems better and more convenient to just give them to Sugiya, so what's the catch? Well, guess what? There isn't a catch. In fact, you're punished if you give them to Mika. So the only reason you do it is if you just like the girl that much. I'll explain the full impact of this choice in a bit, but it's something to be aware of in advance. After producing the headphones, Sugiya gives us a stairwell key that we'll need to get inside. A fair trade if you ask me. We're then told to look for a guy named Tetsuo if we're in trouble, and with that, we're back out in the hall. The elevators seem like a promising next stop, but I guess I'd be pretty stupid if I actually expected that to work at this point. Another bust. There's quite a lot of ground to cover past the elevator, but only one real point of interest. The stairwell in the southeast corner is sealed, so it'll have to wait until security's shut off. For now, there's a woman named Pheromone Mayumi, who says she's feeling dry and needs more booze. Hand over that bottle of underground romance we have, and she happily chugs it, then gives us a green card. This green card happens to be our ticket inside the control room. We're on some real grind set shit right now. With basically just 2 bottles of alcohol, we were able to finesse our way up to free access to a restricted government facility. Backtracking towards the conveyor belt, the monsters suddenly decided it would be a good time to sprint straight at me. If Naomi were still my partner, or I was alone, I'd have been screwed here. But the funny thing about Kamiya is he can do this. Yeah, he can shoot the monster. You have to press square right as the monster gets close to you, or it won't work. Naturally, you can't kill it either, but it is stunned for a good few seconds and gives you a chance to escape. Kamiya doesn't have unlimited ammo, but he has a lot, so if you're really having trouble staying out of harm's way, this might be the partner for you. Back at the control room, we use the green card and head on in, where we can press this big red button and at long last shut down the security system. Now, all those sealed doors we came across open up for us, and navigating around the first floor of the mesh is much easier and faster. There's a pretty steep consequence for it though. Think about it. It's easier for us to get around, so that means it's easier for the monster to get around too. After you shut off the power, several people we've met along the way turn up dead, having been killed in gruesome fashion. With every kill, our enemy only gets stronger. Unfortunately, it's just something we'll have to deal with. There's no other way out. To finish off the first floor, all we have to do is make our way back to where the southeast area staircase is and head on through. All things considered, this opening act wasn't too bad, but the dungeon crawling gets a little more serious on floor 2. This is by far the longest segment of the game, and in my opinion the most tedious. The production facilities down here are massive, and there's a lot of work to be done. As soon as you get off the staircase, you're immediately thrown to the wolves as the monster drops in yet again and chases you through a narrow hallway with little space to move around. There are a handful of rooms we can duck into along the way. One's empty, one has a terminal that says we're in the workers' quarters, and another has this lady Makihara, who has a dresser she refuses to let us touch. Probably want to note that down before we forget about it. It's not like it's unreasonable to be pissed that some stranger wants to dig through your clothes, but I'm guessing it's something more important. After a bit of walking, the hallway opens up into a bizarre chamber before compressing back to narrow passageways of brick and wood. It gets kinda hypnotic just ambling through these long corridors with barely any sound. Remember how back at the start I said the sewer was really quiet? Well, honestly, a lot of the game is quiet, even when you're being chased. Hardly any parts of the soundtrack last more than a few seconds before pausing and then looping, and it feels like half the places we go don't use the soundtrack, period. Sound effects are also scarce, aside from opening doors and hearing the monster breathing. Even walking and running is totally silent until your stamina gets low and you can hear your heartbeat. It's a unique design choice, certainly aimed at building tension or just allowing you to hear the monster coming. But I'm not sure if I like it for some reason. I've seen others highly praise the sound design, and that one magazine even called it like sound horror or something. I definitely get it. Some areas, like the sewers, are creepy, but I felt mixed on it overall. Sometimes there are long periods where nothing's happening, you're just running between rooms in dead silence. After I started getting used to the game, I found myself wishing there was more there to immerse you in the experience. The humming of machinery or creaking pipes, something, but you're not really going to hear anything like that. When they say you should play this with headphones or in a quiet room, that's no joke. Because of this game's silence, any background noise whatsoever, like a family member's downstairs, TV's on, or you live in an apartment like me, and you can hear your neighbors if you sit there with no other noise, it's gonna kinda ruin the experience a bit, more than it would for most other games, because there's literally nothing else to occupy your ears sometimes. Some of you might say that's a stupid observation, like I'm blaming the game for playing it in a suboptimal environment. I'll just say this, I've never been so aware of how loud bugs are outside at night than when I'm playing Hellnight. I'm not trying to bash it or anything either. I respect minimal sound design as a creative decision, just be aware that it is very minimal. As a matter of fact, and I should have just mentioned this earlier, the European release for this game is especially minimal if you're playing on original hardware. In the Japanese release, some cutscenes were voiced. It's nothing crazy, and I'll show some examples of it a bit later, but rather than dubbing the voices, or, just leaving them in, the European version takes them out, which is a huge shame. The saving grace here is that today, thankfully, it's not so much of a problem because most ROMs I could find already had the voices patched in. Missing voice acting aside, like I said, I could easily understand why someone would love this minimal style, and just as well the opposite. If you're in the latter camp, well, later parts of the story do ramp up the audio usage a bit. Anyway, talking to Kamiya in this area has him start to get irritated with us. Apparently he has a splitting headache and we're not making it any better. Didn't he say we were gonna have a good time together? Now we can't even talk to each other? Towards the upper end of the map, we can snag a livestock area pass lying on a desk and meet Reese. This is the guy who Mika originally got her headphones from, if you remember. This dude sucks. He's a thief who openly admits to stealing all kinds of things from around the mesh, including children's toys and canned food. Put two and two together, and it's obvious Reese here stole those headphones from Sukiya and gave them to Mika. Thankfully, we were able to return them to the rightful owner, and he doesn't know about that yet. Aside from stories about the things he's stolen, Reese offers nothing to our escape effort. And so, it's time to move on to an area I would come to not like very much, the livestock area. You'll hit a rotating chamber room where you have to put in your pass, and then it swings you on over. This is one of the biggest rooms in the game, and you'll have to comb the entire thing if you want to be sure you aren't missing anything important. You also end up coming back here several times to get more information and new items. This section easily has the most backtracking, to the point that I think it gets a little egregious. Let's check it out. The first thing we run into is a little girl named Miku with a stuffed, well, I thought it was a pig, but apparently it's a bear named Bicky. Miku asks Bicky if we're going to be alright, and he says we're gonna die. Nice guy. Now, I assume this toy isn't possessed by Satan, and it's just Miku providing the voice for it, but you never know, maybe it's alive. Passing those two, we enter into a room with giant rusty pipes, where a man named Maruho complains about all of the shutters being down on this floor, as well as the stairs having been demolished entirely. Everyone's just kinda stuck here. It's a real fish in a barrel type of situation. We'll have to keep our eyes out for the next control room and take care of that, although it didn't turn out too well for the people upstairs. Desperate for a way out of this, Maruho suggests we check out an elevator all the way at the bottom of the mesh, where the cult hangs out. He says that we might be able to convince them to let us use it. This is actually a really bad idea, and Kamiya gets so offended by it that he threatens to kill Maruho where he stands just for saying it. The crazy part is, you can actually let him do it. You're given the choice to stop him. I wasn't sure what exactly stopping him entailed, like asking him to relax a little bit or grabbing the gun out of his hand, but I did it anyway because frankly, I'd rather use the bullets on the monster. Kamiya surprisingly eases off fast at our request, and from here, we're free to get our hands dirty in the animal pens. This place has to smell absolutely terrible. There's barely any ventilation, and the place is dimly lit. No way it isn't musty beyond belief. Everything just looks alike around here, and the monster's patrols get even more aggressive. A couple of times, he would just pop in out of seemingly nowhere and scare me to death, which forced me to chew through more ammo. There are a couple items in here you don't want to miss, like this room right here on the map. There's nothing inside except a trash can, but at the bottom, there's a ripped piece of some kind of pass that'll take us to another area. Then, you have another room here where this cultist will give you a flute if you answer a few questions correctly. The questions are a little strange and might take some trial and error. You're first asked if you'd choose to help a white crow or a black dove. The answer is white crow. Then you're asked who would live in a city you built with your own hands, children or adults, and the answer is adults. Last, he asks if you prefer the darkness of the ocean or the void of space, and the right choice is the ocean. Get all three right, and the prize is yours. Now, what do we do with it? No idea. At least not yet. Even though this isn't really a residential area, you still can find other people hanging around. Most important is this lady Awaji, known as the Matron of the Mesh, who tells us to go talk to Leno, that cloaked man from up in the meeting area. He apparently has an office nearby, and might be able to help us out. It sounds like there might be an elevator on this floor too, and that would be better than borrowing the one controlled by the Holy Ring. Another highlight is a scene you can get with Razzo, who does his best to dash any optimism you might have about escaping. He laughs in our face when he realizes we're still trying to get out, and makes it sound like the Holy Ring's elevator is really the only thing worth looking into, and reminds us that it'll almost certainly get us killed. Kamiya gets suspicious of Razzo and suspects he's not just any ordinary kid, which causes Razzo to abruptly change the subject and leave. Kamiya remarks that Razzo's eyes are hiding something, and that he isn't who he seems to be. Well, he does seem to know a lot about the mesh for being so young. I'm sure this isn't the last time we'll see him. From here, we might as well check out Leno's office. You can find it at the southeast corner of the map. It's practically a straight line from the entrance if you don't turn to the left when you walk in like I did. Leno's office plays cool rock music and is completely devoid of paper, pens, or really anything you'd need to do any sort of work. At first he has no time for us, but when we bring up Awaji, he decides to listen. After telling him that we'd like to escape, he confirms the existence of an elevator on this floor, over in the research area. The catch is, we'll need a pass to get in there, and Leno's not just going to give us his without us doing him a favor in return. Leno explains that he's a cleanup man, essentially a bounty hunter, and offers to deputize us, saying that we need to track down a thief named Kojima, as well as his accomplice Miyake. After agreeing, he just hands over the pass, to be used for work purposes. To be honest, I think he made a huge mistake here. We're probably the absolute worst people to deputize. One of us has literally no skills and can only run for a few seconds, and the other one's a serial killer. But times are desperate, and I guess stopping these thieves matters more than ganging up on the monster outside. Like, come on, all three of us could probably kill it, right? I guess not. So, to get to the research area, you have to run from Leno's office all the way back to the entrance. Instead of putting in the livestock pass, you put in the research pass, and it rotates you over. If you thought the monster was hungry before, you wouldn't believe it in here. This might be his favorite hunting spot. That's what it felt like to me, at least. Watch this scare. I'm just sitting here, right? And bam! Flies in right out of the darkness. The only choice I had was to fire off a few rounds at him. There are some parts of this area where you can go upstairs and walk on paths that hang above other ones. And I think he can jump down if he's on top of you, but I'm not entirely sure because of how short the render distance is. He gets around fast though, and you won't want to stay in one place for very long. After filling out your map, you'll find a big hallway with one door at each end. Onishi, that guy who commented on our compass like way back at the start, can be found hanging out in both of them. His text box is all glitched out for some reason too. In the first room you enter, no matter which one it is, Onishi says he knows we're looking for Miyake, and that he's looking forward to watching us work. In the other one, he notices our flute and says we'll be able to use it to scare Miyake out of his hiding spot once we find it. In the room to the south, be sure not to miss the other half of the ripped up pass. Once you have both halves, in the northern room here, you can use your screwdriver on this piece of cardboard to create a replica, which should give us access to another area back at the ticket machine. On the upper level of the research area, you can spot some bizarre machinery, as well as witness a heated battle between Ivanov, that Black Ops guy, and the monster. Ivanov makes an absolute embarrassment of the thing, spraying it with a flamethrower and then shooting missiles at it. Damaged, the monster stumbles out of frame, and then Ivanov turns to speak with us. He remembers us from the tracks and says he's here on behalf of the Japanese government, but he can't tell us much else. His orders are to annihilate the monster, which he calls the hybrid, as well as anyone who's come into contact with it. Ivanov explains that the hybrid can absorb anything it comes across, whether it's organic or not, and may potentially have no limit to how much it can grow. For whatever reason, Kamiya seems to not like Ivanov very much, and just kind of messes around with him, acting purposefully vague and passive-aggressive. It reaches a boiling point when Ivanov gives him a hard look and says he has the eyes of a ruthless, intelligent killer, and Kamiya responds by saying Ivanov has the eyes of policemen he's seen crawling in their own blood. Ivanov basically gives up on us after that, and leaves after hinting that Kamiya is acting under the hybrid's influence. I would really have loved more than anything to just ditch Kamiya right here and go on some military adventures, but unfortunately it's too late for that. After the fierce battle is over and everyone's moved on, we're left alone in a room coated in green monster goo. There's a conspicuously giant crate sitting to the right, and you can hear noises coming from inside of it. Turns out, if you use the flute here, it's Miyake, who gets scared and surrenders to us immediately. Leno then barges in out of nowhere and takes him away. Well, that's the accomplice down for the count. Hopefully we can find Kojima nearby. There's one staircase we can't reach yet because it's surrounded by a slippery floor of ice that you can't actually see. It's around the middle path up here at the top of the map. For a minute, I actually thought something was wrong with my controller. Once you step on it, you slide for a bit, and then lose momentum and move incredibly slow. It feels like when you're in a dream, and you're trying to get away from something, and no matter what you do, you just can't. Actually, it doesn't even need to be a dream, because that can just happen in the game. The hybrid will get your ass if he catches you near the ice, so don't let it happen. How do you take care of the ice then? Well, deep into this area, there's actually a valve room, which is generating a huge amount of cold air because it's part of the facility's cooling system. That's the reason the floor upstairs is so slippery, but we have a life to get back to, so these people are going to have to do without AC for a while. What you have to do is hit this frozen valve with your crowbar, which removes the ice and allows you to turn it. Now, as somebody who has played one singular video game before, I feel like I should point out that these two objects in combination bring to mind a certain other series. I'm not saying it's a reference or anything, it's just kind of funny. They came out the same year too. You'll actually want to remember where the valve room is, because right across from it is the elevator, although it's currently sealed off. With the ice gone, we can go up this staircase ramp thing and find some laboratories. In the first one I went into, Onishi popped up again and just hovered around saying nothing of importance. There's what appears to be a second hybrid, or another creature a lot like it, being kept in this big tank here. It seems like it's only the upper half though, so it probably won't be chasing us around anytime soon. So let's get our facts straight. The government kept one of these things here in the mesh, and they kept one in the labs in Ichigaya. There's absolutely no way they'd just leave this guy here if they didn't want the cultists to play around with it, right? So that means they're totally working in collusion. They're letting the cultists kidnap people as much as they'd like in order to keep it under wraps or accomplish some other goal. If that other goal is to summon some kind of evil god by harvesting blood or something, I'm really curious to know what Japan's government would gain from it. Surely the Dark Messiah is not going to take orders from some guy in a suit. Anyway, the other room across from this one needs some kind of key card to get inside. So guess what? It's time to backtrack to Leno's. Yeah, it's a pretty far walk too. When you get there, he thanks us for finding Miyake and gives us a red card. And you know what you do with the red card? Go back to the door we just left. That's some shit, man. So retrace your steps again, and now we can get inside, where you'll find the second floor's control room. Turn off the security system, and now the elevator next to the valve room is open. But we cannot catch a break. Surprise, it doesn't work. There is a way to get it fixed, but we'll have to wrap up our work with Leno first. To find Kojima, you need to use that fake cardboard pass we made at the rotator room. It dumps us out back in the residential area where we started. Remember how I told you to keep Makihara's dresser in mind? Turns out that's where our guy is. I knew she was being a little too antsy about that thing. If you use your crowbar, you can outpry it right open, and Kojima falls out onto the floor. Leno then materializes from nowhere and takes him away. Now you know what you have to do? Go back to Leno's office. What in the actual ass? I mean, maybe there's a way to do this more efficiently if you know the exact order of events ahead of time, but I don't know. It seems to me like you're required to make at least 3 trips to this office. One for the research pass, one for the red card, and now another for the factory pass. Thankfully, this is the last time you have to do it. Our community service is now complete, and it's a good thing because I don't think I could handle another one. Our next goal is basically to figure out who can fix that elevator, and the answer lies in the factory, a desolate, almost prison-like area that holds engineers' quarters, supply rooms, and a handful of conveyor belts. The hybrid must know we're making good progress here because he drops in fast for another chase. After passing by a few empty rooms, I found this guy called Freaked Sakazaki hanging out in a storage area. Sakazaki says he's been in the mesh his entire life, and he's never been so afraid as he is right now. He feels like everything is spiraling out of control, with no way to stop it. He might be right, because in another room I found a dead guy. It seems like the hybrid might be a few steps ahead of us. There's even a spot with a busted up door and a massive trail of blood. He must really be on the warpath. Fortunately, there are still some people kicking around deeper into the place. One guy, Sutao, hands us a CD-ROM that he says was dropped by a cultist in the research area. Sutao says it doesn't work on his CD player, but we might be able to find a use for it. Your ultimate goal in here is to find Tetsuo, the robot freak. This part of the game is where the headphone decision comes into play. If you gave the headphones to Mika, Tetsuo won't want anything to do with you, and he won't fix the elevator. You actually end up doing it yourself, and your playthrough is going to look a little different. It seems like you actually skip the factory if you gave the headphones to Mika, and Tetsuo hates you, which I consider to be a punishment since this game isn't super long and it makes it even shorter. As long as you gave the headphones to Sukiya, you're all good. Tetsuo gladly offers to fix up the elevator for us as a friend of a friend and says he'll just meet us there. All we have to do now is make it back to the elevator in the research area, and we're done with floor 2. But, and there's always a but, it wasn't as easy to do that as I'd hoped. The hybrid was really mad at me after leaving Tetsuo's place, and just wouldn't leave me alone. After escaping briefly, I heard him in the distance and hopped onto a conveyor belt, out of breath. And what do you think happened? He was waiting right at the end of it on the other side. Instead of staying calm, I panicked for a second and missed my window to fire Kamiya's gun. And the hybrid showed no mercy, killing him immediately. Oh, thank God. I was getting really nervous I was going to finish the game with this guy as my partner. Look, Kamiya already flat out said he doesn't want us going back outside. And with every passing moment, he just kept getting more and more aggressive with other people, even us. He was going to go nuclear eventually. I think the hybrid did us a favor there. I might be disappointed with myself for getting caught again, but I can't say I'm upset about the outcome. And I know, we still have to get all the way to the elevator completely unprotected. If this happens to you, just pay attention, that's all I can say. The conveyor belts are a bad place to be. But now that we're out of there, from here on, as long as we're not totally careless, it should be fine. If you have the balls and patience to do it, there is one more thing to see back at Leno's office, that place we hate so much, although it's not required. It's, his dead body. The monster broke his neck. I honestly hate to see this because even though this place was the bane of my existence, I still thought Leno was a cool guy and hoped he would kick some ass like Ivanov did. We'd better get out of here and not waste his sacrifice. When we get to the elevator, Tetsuo's already gotten to work and says it's mostly been fixed. The button to go down a floor won't come on, but that's all good with us because we want to go up. I'm not even going to pretend to get excited about this, like we're about to escape. Come on, really? As soon as you step on, the shit goes up like 5 feet, and then the line snaps and sends us hurtling all the way to the bottom of the mesh. Nice. We're now officially in no man's land. Cult territory, home field for the freaks. Floor 3. We start out in the officers' rooms, where we're quickly spotted by a man who demands we follow him to the ceremony of awakening to be sacrificed to the Dark Messiah. The cultist lunges at us, but then gets shot from behind as he's about to grab us. Our savior this time is a French photojournalist named Renee Lorraine. Renee greets us and says she's not a mainstream journalist, preferring to work on unusual topics that nobody else dares to touch, like the Holy Ring. Seeing that we're all alone, Renee says she's off to sneak into the ceremony of awakening and invites us to tag along. With that, once again, we've got a partner to watch our back. And this time it's someone a lot friendlier. Although, I can't completely rule out that Renee isn't a serial killer too. She did gun down that cultist like it was nothing. That says to me that it's not her first time. And this is all just to snap some pictures and maybe write an article or something? Anyway. It doesn't take long before the hybrid catches wind of what we're up to. I was talking to a cultist about ascending to a new form through a process called the Great Union, and when I left the room, there he was, swinging down from the ceiling. He's gotten a bit bigger, I think. I chose a hallway at random to run down, and apparently I chose incorrectly because it led to a locked door. Thankfully, Renee has a gun too, as we saw, just like Kamiya, with the catch being that she carries much less ammo. You can use your gun exactly 5 times before it's dry, and from there, the only help you're going to be getting is moral support. So be sure to save it for emergencies, where death is almost certain, like this one. It really felt like he was lasered in on me now. Maybe he's mad that I found another buddy so fast. Oddly, you can find Mole down here on the 3rd level. Isn't this supposed to be no man's land? His rent must be due soon. I asked Mole about the CD-ROM because that's really the only thing we have that has no clear purpose, but he doesn't know what it is either, so a lot of help that was. The first place you'll really want to track down is the command center. This area we start off in isn't big at all, so it's not hard. The command center is, in my opinion, one of the creepier areas of the game. It seems extra dark and plays a looping track that sounds straight out of Yume Nikki. Just this shot of the stairs with that super short loop. Ugh, it feels like you're in a fever dream or something, I don't know. There's not a whole lot in here, just a catwalk that wraps around towards another door, but it really feels like someone might jump out at you at any second. On the other side are more apartments housing cultists. One of them, Kiyama, basically says we're an idiot for being here, because the ceremony of awakening is just about to happen, and we're the key component. The High Priest has chosen us specifically to be sacrificed to the Dark Messiah. You remember how at the very start of the game, the cultist recognized us up in the city and then chased us? It wasn't just because we looked like a good victim. We're on the top of the cult's hit list for some reason. That can only mean we have some kind of connection to them then. I guess it's not entirely clear who exactly we're playing as. Kiyama isn't the most devout cultist and suggests we just leave instead of walking into a trap, expressing worry that this might actually end the world if it works out. What he's saying makes a lot of sense, but our only choice is to keep going. It's like I said in the last video, you have to see these horrible ideas through. Otherwise, there's not much of a game left. Another cultist over here, named Koseki, is about the exact opposite of Kiyama. He takes all of this really seriously and sits around singing praises to the Dark God. Koseki asks us to sing with him, and we're given an interesting set of responses. First, you can sing for the gods of the 8-reeded plane, which makes him really upset and has him kick us out. Now, if you're like me, you're probably thinking, what the hell was that about? Why did that make him so mad? Gods of the 8-reeded plane? I did a couple searches online and I couldn't find anything out, but it stuck in my head for a while to the point that I cracked open that guidebook again and found what the choice said in Japanese. And actually, I think it might have been a mistranslation. The original text doesn't say 8-reeded plane. It says 8 million kami, which is a real phrase, used to refer to the seemingly infinite amount of kami or gods in Shinto. So I guess he didn't appreciate us calling on Japan's traditional gods. Kind of fascinating. The next one down might look familiar to Megami Tensei fans, or, religious people. It's the Tetragrammaton, the Hebrew name for God. If you invoke God's name, Koseki seems kinda weirded out and says we shouldn't say it, but oddly, he doesn't kick us out of the room. That's a little unexpected. It's almost like he actually respects it, and he has a point. Traditionally, I don't think you're supposed to pronounce it out loud. They even have that as a gimmick in one of the Shin Megami Tensei games.
I will now guide you to its universe. The monolith is connected to its universe. The universe will surely have its own perils.
It's kind of weird to me that his reaction is less severe towards the Abrahamic god versus the Kami. Naturally though, the answer he's looking for is Dark Messiah, whereupon he calls us enlightened and gives us a blue card. We're going to be making use of that in just a minute. Deeper into the place, after riding a conveyor belt, we'll find a soldier, 2nd Lieutenant Kajiwara, who claims he's posted here to make sure that monsters unearthed during an excavation don't make it topside. Okay, so the monsters were discovered, not created then. Kajiwara says he's requested infantry support several times, but nobody's ever answered or come down to check on him. This dude's been down here for like 50 fucking years since World War II just waiting. You gotta respect it. I hope he doesn't find the hybrid though, because that sword won't be enough. Now, pretty close by to here, you'll find a door that just opens up if you have the blue card. And what do you know, it's the control room. Not too hard this time. Turn off security, and now you'll want to look for this spot where there's a wall with a door visible at the top. Go up to this card slot on the wall, put in your Holy Ring Iron card, and it brings out a staircase. Look at that. Up here, you're back in the command center, I think below the catwalk from before. There's a big situation room in the middle with a computer in it and some ID card readers. The protagonist points out that this technology wouldn't have existed back when the mesh was built, so it's likely cultist property. The computer is actually where you can use the CD-ROM. I sorta had trouble figuring this out, because everyone kept talking about finding a CD player, and I can't remember the last time in real life I saw a computer with a disk drive. Obviously I know they used to be everywhere, it just slipped my mind for a minute. We totally evolved in reverse on that one, by the way. Bring the disk drives back. Even my fucking car doesn't have one. Like, what kind of shit is that? Anyway, you pop this thing in, and it starts showing a church roster with a bunch of random names and bizarre job titles. It goes on, and that's it. It's really not so clear what the point is, besides immersion. I beat the rest of the game without figuring out what the names meant, if anything. The core puzzle of this room is figuring out the right order to scan ID cards we've collected with these machines. And by that, I mean guess until you get it right. The proper order is red, blue, green. Once you've done it, outside, a huge gate that was previously sealed will now be open, which, whoa, leads us into a train station. This is how we're going to get to the Great Hall, where the Ceremony of Awakening is taking place. As we board the train that arrives, Renee warns us to stay put, because there are cultists on board in the other cars. She tells us this train was put here by the Japanese army during the war, and it is, in fact, the only way to get to the ceremony. When we get there, we're dumped on our ass in a torchlit room, and... wait, Great Hall? Come on, how did nobody notice that? Some of the typos are like, whatever, you know, but this one, it's impossible to ignore. Especially because they got it right on the save screen. Oh well. So, the Great Hall. Most of the cultists are already up ahead getting ready for the ceremony, and Renee decides to briefly leave the party, saying it's better if we don't get involved in her shenanigans. She says we can wait here if we want, and promises to come back, but kinda trails off as she says it, which made me not trust her so much. I'm definitely not gonna wait here. Without a partner now, we're a sitting duck. We might as well take a look around and find a nice room to hide in. Or even better, the elevator to go back outside. Up ahead is a big stone door with the holy ring symbol on it. The ceremony actually is taking place right behind it, but it's sealed, so we can't just walk right in. To the left of the door is a path that leads to a ladder, and if you climb down, it leads to an area I'm pretty sure nobody upstairs even knows exists. Floor 4, the isolated floor. The only thing down here is a huge chamber housing a fusion reactor, known as the Amaterasu 1. It's apparently been running since 1944, and it's not looking too good right now. In fact, it's leaking, which prompts our character to suggest we leave. What, is it gonna blow up? That would be just our luck. That's really all it's down here. It's just there for you to look at and ponder. Well, it sure does explain how the mesh is still functioning after so long. And it might be a clue that the Japanese government has some kind of hidden knowledge. I didn't think about it at first, but they might have told us the year it was turned on for a reason. I'm not some kind of scientist, right? Far from it. This is all coming from a brief series of searches. There could be more to the story, but it sounds like in the real world, a complete fusion device didn't exist until 1951, and it was a bomb. Also, unless they send someone down here to feed this thing uranium rods or something, well, I don't think anyone's invented a generator in reality that sustains itself indefinitely yet. So this technology might not even exist, period. Definitely weird. Maybe it's time travel. Back upstairs, there's only one other way to go. Take a right at the ceremony door, and we find a huge crack in the wall. You know what we have to do? Yeah, that's right. We're climbing through. Let's get this dark god shit on the road. Standing at the back of the ceremony hall, away from the cultists, we can take our time for a minute and look around. On the other side of the place, in plain view of dozens of people who will likely murder us on sight, is the fabled elevator leading back home. Not gonna be easy to reach that, and knowing this game, it's probably broken too. Up on stage in the middle of the room is a pedestal holding some kind of bizarre pulsating orb, and next to that is that absolutely insane thing they showed a clip of in the game's intro. This is the Holy Ring Priest, and I don't think I need to say it, but he doesn't look quite human. After we steal a glance at him, he raises his arms and starts speaking in an ominous, booming voice. Check this out. The atmosphere here is insane. These guys are getting preached at by a friggin' alien. The High Priest says everyone that's been brought down from the surface to be sacrificed has merged with the Prince, or the hybrid, and now the last sacrifice has arrived. Guess he knew we were here the whole time. The cultists turn around like zombies and start coming for us, but then all of a sudden, Renee pops out of her hiding spot and starts blasting people indiscriminately. In her own words, they aren't human anymore. As Renee continues firing into the crowd, the whole place starts shaking, and then the hybrid busts down from the ceiling. The priest says the dark god has finally appeared, and then Renee fills it with bullets too. Ignoring the absolute chaos going on around him, the priest continues chanting, then pricks his finger and seemingly completes the ceremony as the chamber falls to pieces. The priest gets crushed by a rock from the ceiling, and the floor opens up into an abyss that swallows up everything. Alright, so I gotta warn you. Just strap in for what comes next. Really. If you've never seen this before and you have no idea what's about to happen, I envy you because frankly it blew my mind. All of our questions will be answered, but things get a little abstract first. Let me show you. As we open our eyes, we find ourselves floating in a void, with Razzo drifting in front of us. He tells us to sleep and cross the barrier, then stresses that finding the altar is now our only way to escape. Coming to again, Razzo appears before us as some kind of energy ghost, and starts laughing about how all of the cultists just died to become one with their dark messiah, but actually just offered themselves to something called the Hive. Yeah, they might have been tricked a little bit. Razzo says the cult was being manipulated by a being known as That Which Whispers, and they've now been discarded after completing their purpose. The strategy guide actually suggests that the entire ritual back there may have been specifically intended just for us to crash it and end up here. We've now arrived at the outskirts to the Hive, a world separate from our own, with its own rules and physics beyond our reasoning. Razzo seems to like it here, and promises that we'll see sights we could never imagine, as well as our wildest nightmares. Renee, thankfully still with us, asks what we're supposed to do here, and Razzo says we need to survive until the end, when we reach the altar. Then he disappears. I really can't decide if I love him or hate him. I really don't know what adjectives to use to describe this place. The ground seems to be an oddly colored mess of stone, and there are structures scattered around that look kinda like fish? You got this tunnel that feels like an art exhibit, and some paths are blocked by shell-like structures double our height. Not too far in, you're shown a cutscene of some kind of pod opening, and then you see the hybrid, who's attacked by another monster that can shoot out of its hands. This other one kicks the hybrid's ass, and then it starts talking to us. This is That Which Wanders. First of all, what a portrait. This one's still pretty human looking for whatever reason. That Which Wanders identifies us as the one who has the blood of their dark prince. He says he was told about us by yet another being, known as That Which Leads, and remarks that we're different than normal prey. We're then told the hive is divided into several areas according to function, kinda like the mesh. That Which Wanders says we'll need to use warp points to get to the other areas, the reactor room and the data storage room, and those warp points require nexus stones. We already know about one of them. It was that pulsating orb the priest had on his pedestal, apparently placed in our world by That Which Judges. There are a lot of these guys, aren't there? Well, if we can find wherever it landed, that should give us a good start. Although Renee is quite an open-minded and reliable partner, this is where she starts to check out a little bit. She just refuses to believe what's happening, and that's totally fine. I don't blame her. It's alright, we'll find the stone. It's actually pretty close by. Keep going through this next tunnel, and you'll see a door that looks kinda like a bug face. Inside is a pillar that fell all the way into this world from the Great Hall, and next to it, the Ebony Stone. Nice, super easy. And now, all we have to do is find the warp point. Through another door, we'll find That Which Writhes, who doesn't understand why we're in here. It asks if we're actually a worker unit that was produced to look like prey, but no, we actually are prey. This thing just can't get over the fact that we somehow got in here, and it's completely mystified, continuing to wonder why it happened, and forcing us to leave. I'm guessing the hive doesn't get too many visitors. Leaving this room, hello? You can't just show up like that. Well, there goes another magazine. What the shit? The hybrid must have finished licking his wounds because he decided to spawn practically right on top of me. Yeah, he's not done chasing us yet. These tunnels are not a great place to be if he's nearby. It's way too cramped, so try and get through them fast if you can. Although, if a jump scare like that happens, I don't know what to tell you. Hopefully you have some ammo. Moving beyond this tunnel, we've got a few more hive members we can encounter, and then we'll be at the first warp point. That Which Consumes can barely hold its hunting instinct back, and calls us sweet and delicious, warning that we aren't meant to be here and that the collective brain has no idea how we got in. It suggests we visit the conversion room to have our fear harvested, and says the Hive looks forward to having our ripened essence flowing through it. Now, why would I do that? Willingly join this hive mind? Hopefully our character's not that desperate. Then we have that which crawls, which appears to be a mostly human upper half with a stretchy torso and a couple of spider legs. So wait, this thing has 2 asses? I really need to see how it moves around. I mean, there's no way this is the most efficient configuration for something to crawl with. I think the Hive needs to reevaluate this one. That which crawls likes to talk shit, and says that which wanders has become perverted and acts like a human, thinking, feeling, and moving like we do. I'd probably be petty too if my body were intentionally designed for me to have to stare past my own nuts when I talk to somebody. It's gotta be tough. Last up, in an area that kinda looks like it's made out of bone or something, we have that which feeds. This is the strangest of them all. That which feeds asks if we'd allow it to feed on our revulsion. You're given a choice, yes or no. Now, I've thought about saying no because we have zero idea what feeding entails, but I opted to say yes because I figured it was in my best interest to follow the local customs of this new world we've fallen into. Now, I don't know if I should put like a content advisory here or something. Maybe you're like washing the dishes right now and you got this video on TV and your kids or your grandma's hanging around. Look, I'm gonna give you a second to run and get the remote if you don't want them to hear about an alien monster putting its tongue in our ear in graphic detail. For the rest of you, well, here goes. After accepting its offer, that which feeds produces a warm, wet feeler from its mouth, which squirms into our ear. Our character then moans as it tickles our eardrum, and then suddenly, our skin starts tingling, and it becomes covered in white bugs that start laying eggs. The eggs then hatch into maggots that start rapidly eating us alive from the inside. As we beg for it to stop, it's all revealed to be a hallucination, as that which feeds removes its feeler from our ear. As we sit there breathing hard, the Hive thanks us for our sweet taste, and then we're free to go. I can't say I saw that one coming. The craziest part is, Renee was there watching it, and she doesn't say anything about it. They should have named this guy That Which Freaks, holy shit. Alright, so after this, you get to the warp point. This thing actually does defy description. It sort of looks like a caterpillar laying on top of some gears, maybe, and there's a spot in the middle where we can put in the ebony orb. Stick it in, and the machine turns on and starts spinning, then we kind of just materialize into the reactor room. Guess what this place is? It's a teleporter maze. That must be why Atlas published it. I'm going to give you the highlights of what you can find in here. It's one of the more difficult areas of the game because the entire thing is laid out like a tunnel. There aren't any open rooms to navigate, it's just narrow corridors, and the hybrid takes full advantage of it. In fact, it seems like he uses the teleporters himself to get behind you. The first room I found had That Which Hatches, which looks like a disgusting evil baby hybrid. This little dude says the Hive is given life by the reactor, and that's about it. That's my bad for expecting deep conversation from a baby. Then I found another room, with another That Which Hatches. They're really pumping these things out then, that's good to know. This one just says to go to the altar and see the prince. We find yet another one seemingly moments after being born, and it's so young that it hasn't been forced into the hive mind yet. When it sees us, it starts shouting about something pushing into its mind, urging it to assimilate. Kinda sad. This species has free will then, but only for a few minutes before most of them lose it forever. I would have thought they were just born already a part of the collective. By the time I made it past most of the hatcheries, I was dangerously low on ammo, down to my last magazine. The hybrid is at its prime in here, but you really want to do your best to save bullets and not be like me, because there's one more section of the game coming up in a bit that becomes much easier if you have them. One last hatchery has an adult in it named That Which Speaks, who tells us the vermilion stone held in the reactor is the heart of their existence and allows them to continuously create new life. So if I take it, does the whole hive die? It'd be nice to put down the hybrid for good, but I'm not sure if I really want to wipe out this entire species, you know? I guess if they all put the hybrid in our world, they just do it again though, so we might be forced to cut the problem at the root. The final creature we'll encounter before arriving at the reactor core is that which quivers, who's in the process of dying because the Hive decided it wasn't useful. It asks us, as its final request, if we'd share our joy with it. I know it was kinda weird the last time we shared an emotion in here, but come on, this one's dying, and it's definitely never felt joy before. So I accepted, and this time, thankfully, it doesn't involve licking our eardrums. Although I was prepared for it if that was the case. We feel wind hit our face, and then start to smell dry sand. We're surrounded by warm sunlight and smiling people, and that which quivers gets scared, because now it doesn't want to be reabsorbed into the Hive. This part kinda got me. I thought it was poignant. We're forced to just leave it there to die, and the last thing it does is become self-aware, referring to itself as I instead of we. It's been a long time since our character has felt joy. There's nothing happy going on down here, but even just the memory of it was enough to shake the monster back to its senses. Would it have been better to just deny its request and let it get reabsorbed, never knowing what happiness felt like? Or was it worth it to experience something so overwhelming and confusing after being deemed worthless by the collective? Feels like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Well, our last stop is the reactor heart, a room that looks partially organic and actually does beat like a real heart. Renee says it feels like something out of Dante and wonders why the government would leave it here. I kinda think though that nobody's ever seen this before. There's no way the government knows this is here, right? It would make sense if that big fusion reactor in the mesh was based on this, but from what the Hive says, humans don't just show up here. So it's not like people came in and studied it. Maybe the Holy Ring's high priest was some kind of middleman who passed alien knowledge to the government? It's gotta be something like that. We're able to remove the vermilion stone with no trouble, and the room goes dark, but the hybrid is still alive, and spawns right outside to try and stop you. If you can make it past him, all you have to do now is throw the stone into the next warp point, and you'll be home free for a while. Now this is where things go off the rails, okay? The whole conspiracy starts to unravel, and I don't blame you if it feels like a lot to process. To be honest though, this might be one of my favorite sequences in a game ever. It's very cool. After activating the warp device, we drop into the data storage room. To our right is a door that leads to a bizarre pitch black wall that can't be passed yet. Directly forwards is a plant-like terminal that sprouts a web of blood vessels that twist and distort into computer chips. Then, the whole of our being is taken and transferred into a digital form. For the first few seconds, it's an all-out assault on your senses. The room flashes, a distorted siren wails out, and garbage text fills up the screen. In our mind, I guess, a voice informs us that it's adjusting this environment to our human brain. And gradually, the text becomes readable, the flashing stops, and the siren morphs into what could be called music. We're then warned that an unusual bioelectric data matrix has bypassed the usual protocols and made it into the core of the data storage room. That must be us, or Renee, potentially both. The system decides to initiate a request to execute removal procedures, but it doesn't get approved right away, and we're free to walk around for the time being. Unfortunately, Renee is gone again, and I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to find her. Take a few steps forward, and a voice calls out for us to halt. You'll notice there's nobody there, except there is. You see this red thing? This right here? Well, that's what's talking to us. Maybe imagine it as like a physical representation of a computer program. This is that which divides, who controls access to bioelectric data matrices. It says that because of the intrusion, the prey they've collected and converted to data have become restless, and it decides to scan us to see if we're the intruder. After a few seconds pass, it determines that we do have the signature signs of prey, but we also resemble a being known as an Old One. In fact, our signature is almost identical. That which divides says our bioelectric pattern has been altered, and then grants us minimum level security clearance and instructs us to assist the Hive in the capture of the anomaly. It almost feels like they're asking us to find and kill ourselves, but we might as well take advantage of that confusion about our identity and roll with it. With minimum level clearance, there are a few things we can do around here. The ground floor is basically laid out as a long hallway that goes down the center, with several square-shaped rooms connected to corridors around the periphery. Most of these square-shaped rooms have data ghosts from the mesh standing in the middle of them. The first one I came across was Ogari, who seems quite normal and put together given the circumstances. Ogari says he's been here for a long time, but he's never seen anyone get access clearance. Then I found Yuria, who suggests we visit that which reveals if we'd like to find who we're looking for, although she doesn't say where to find said being. After that, I spoke with Mihail, who asks to come inside us? I can't say that in a video, what? No dinner first? Of course I said yes, I had to know what happened. And what happens is, he flies into us and disappears. Then he thanks us, and that's it. He's gone. It's so unnerving, like, what just happened? Unless I missed something, nobody mentions this ever again. You don't see the guy again. He just, like, merged with us, permanently. Well, I hope it was worth it for him. On the other side of this floor, I found a familiar face. It's Mario. Long time no see. And hey, we avenged your friend. Kamiya ate shit back on the second floor. Mario doesn't really say much, but it's nice to see someone we know in here. Or maybe not, since that means he's dead. Nearby Mario is someone named Toru, who's got a greenish glow, and seems to be pretty knowledgeable about where we are. I wonder if he was a cultist and they get like special treatment here or something. Toru says the Old Ones store all of their information here in the data storage room, and likens this place to their version of cyberspace. So, we're inside the alien internet. Apparently the Old Ones keep data copies of all of their victims, and sometimes compress them to make more space, which according to Toru is even more painful than dying. Seems pretty bleak, although some people, like Marudashi here, are as fanatical as ever, and view it as a wonderful world of pure spirit, and evidence of the Dark Messiah's immense power. Different strokes, I guess. After you're tired of talking to these digital people, there's another thing you don't want to miss. A little device you can find at this yellow orb named That Which Reveals. You might as well think of this as Evil Alien Wikipedia because that's basically what it is. What does it reveal? How about the entire backstory of the game, organized into conveniently selectable topics? Talk about an exposition dump. There are like 3 pages of choices here. Now to its credit, it does kind of pace out this massive amount of information. Some of the choices are restricted to higher security clearance levels, so you take breaks to solve puzzles and stuff, and then come back if you want, right? But I don't know, I still think it's a little funny. I respect the artistic decision to portray it like this, but I sort of wish these reveals were presented any other way than a glossary of terms. Anyway, I digress. It's wild stuff regardless. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to summarize the entirety of it right now. I feel like it's more useful for you if I lay it out in linear fashion rather than jumping back and forth. So, here goes. The Hive is an ancient civilization adapted for interstellar colonization. Its eldest members, fittingly known as the Old Ones, have lived through 3 cataclysms and have assimilated countless worlds, even in galaxies beyond ours, by merging with any corporeal matter they come across. The center of the Hive is a control area known as the Altar, which is under direct command of the Prince. As navigator of the Hive, the Prince is responsible for locating planets with psychic energy, and then converting to a physical form to partake in the invasion. The Hive's level of knowledge is like nothing we can imagine. For starters, they have detailed digital records dating back to the moment the Old Ones corporealized. The records are overseen by a being of almost pure psychic energy known as That Which Judges, who we've already heard a little bit about. They've also mastered control of space-time and can bend it for transportation, which is how the warp points we've been seeing work. The Hive even uses this power to master the art of torture and deception. They're capable of creating non-Euclidean spaces and have a complete area called the Conversion Room, dedicated to using these nightmare-like locations to draw out their prey's fear, which they then feed on. One specialized unit, called That Which Whispers, is adapted to manipulate the minds of humans and is directly responsible for creation of the Holy Ring cult. You might ask, why did they go with a cult to harvest fear? Why not just capture or kill all of us with their godlike technology? Well, the Hive's normal procedure when finding a suitable planet is to enter encroachment mode and prepare to assimilate the population directly. In encroachment mode, they fire up the reactors and start producing worker units to bolster their operations, some of them even capable of autonomous thought. When the Hive entered Earth's atmosphere, however, for some reason, the Prince's core was shattered to pieces and all high-level functions of the civilization were suspended. This is implied to have been quite a long time ago. Think about it. The military records back at the Mesh established they were digging Hive corpses up from underground. That also seems to mean that when we landed in the outskirts earlier, we didn't literally fall into another dimension or another world or something. It sounds more like the Hive is actually just embedded deep into the Earth. Even though they were significantly weakened and trapped here, the Hive still found a way to maintain energy over what must have been millions of years. They abducted human samples and used them to create the High Priest, as well as lesser units called acolytes that would collect more prey to be harvested. Together, these two formed the Holy Ring. The Holy Ring reveres the Prince, who we've been calling the Hybrid, as a god, or Dark Messiah. And in essence, it's all kind of a big puppet show to scare the shit out of people and probably collect gullible ones who'll go and get harvested willingly. The Hive finally made a special unit known as That Which Leads, in the exact image of a human, who would be responsible for directing humans to the altar. Now that's the gist of it, and I know that was a lot, but you know what's crazy? It still doesn't answer every question. Most of it, I think, is fairly straightforward, but let's unpack some things for a minute. We know the Hive has been around on Earth for a long time, buried beneath Japan apparently. They've manipulated humans and infiltrated society, and it seems likely that in addition to the cult, they control the government, at least to an extent. I mean, come on, that's the only reason their big confusing World War II maze perfect for getting lost in is right over top of the entrance to their civilization, right? That also suggests Razzo himself must be That Which Leads, because he was on the outskirts with us and knew about the altar. So Kamiya was right. He definitely isn't an ordinary boy. But what I still don't know, even with all of this, is why us? Why are we the key piece to the hybrid regaining its full form as the Prince and presumably killing everyone? Is it just a coincidence that we have energy like the old ones? We'll have to see if there's a real explanation. So, okay, back to the game. Between all of this, what you would have been doing is just running around boosting your security level, like I said. After talking to all the ghosts and reading some entries, you can go back to That Which Divides and get medium level access, which gives us new paths to explore and more articles to read. On one path, you'll find Razzo, who transfers his signature onto ours and earns us high level access. That Which Divides then tells us the Hive is now split into two camps who have differing opinions on why we're here. Now, with high-level access, we can get into a part of this area called the Ancient Memory Block. But before going there, you'll want to track down a couple of items. First, the Decompression Module, which allows you to release some trapped Mesh citizens from being painfully tortured. One of them that I was happy to see is our old pal Leno, who thanks us and says Renee might be nearby. Then there's this cultist who is actually enjoying the unbearable torment and is pissed off that we ruined it. The other thing you want to find is a key module, needed to get into the Ancient Memory Block. Once you're in, you'll find another compressed data matrix, which turns out to be Renee. Pull her out and she rejoins, seemingly unharmed for the most part. Beyond Renee is a massive crystal, a physical embodiment of the Hive's memories, who congratulates us on making it this far, and says we are destined to be the next prince. The ancient memory explains that when the prince was shattered to pieces upon entering Earth's atmosphere, the pieces were scattered across the planet. The essence of the prince essentially became embedded into humanity, and they've been trying to recollect it. And you know what? We're the last piece. So it really is just a stroke of bad luck. We aren't like secretly an alien with our memories wiped or something like that. We're just the unlucky carrier of the prince's essence. The ancient memory says we're bound to our fate and there's no way out of it, then gives us full security access. For some reason though, right after that, they approve the removal procedures and summon the hybrid, who's really big now and flashing colors. So what, do you guys want me to die or go to the altar? Maybe they're trying to corral us over there like cattle or something. Hope you didn't forget how to run after all that reading, because you don't want to mess up now. We're too far in. What you have to do is reach a spot directly across from the ancient memory block. But the hybrid spawns right in front of it, so you have to navigate around him. When you get to the right spot, the system scans us again and warps us to the location of that which judges. Wow, what a design. It's like looking at a warm lobster through a thermal camera. It's kinda awesome. This is that being who's supposed to be mostly psychic energy. I really wonder how they thought of this. It's downright mesmerizing to look at. That which judges says it learned of us from the ancient memory, and that it's time to return us to the corporeal world. We're then given access to a path that brings us all the way back to the beginning of the data storage area. But that weird solid black wall that was there now unfolds into a chamber where we see that which judges manifest into a physical form. We're told to go to the altar, and we're given another Nexus stone, which we can toss into the warp device. Okay, well, not like we really have a choice. When you drop into the next area, it's clear we've been bamboozled, or at the very least, they aren't done screwing around with us yet. This is the conversion room, and if you listen to what I said back there, that's not good. We're smack in the middle of the Hive's non-Euclidean torture chamber. Couldn't they have just sent me straight to the altar or something? Like, why do I have to be the prince's strongest soldier and get his toughest challenges? They've made the place to look like the train tracks back in Tokyo, but you'll notice pretty fast that it's an endlessly looping corridor. To get out, the trick is just to turn around, and a door appears. Naturally though, this is only the start of our council-mandated mindfuck. Now we're in the sewers again, and poor Renee starts to crack a little bit more, calling the whole situation so silly in disbelief. Yeah, I'd say we're well past silly at this point. In this twisted incarnation of the sewers, we're subjected to a wide variety of disturbing visions and unexplainable events. In one of them, the High Priest tells us to forget about our life on Earth and be reborn into darkness, eternally one with the Dark Prince. Then, out of nowhere, Naomi is just magically our partner again, except something seems wrong with her. She's having a dialogue with herself, and the color of her name changes to reflect that she's swapping personalities. It doesn't make much sense at all, and just as soon as it starts, it's already over, as Renee stands there confused about why we're staring at her. Deeper in, you'll start hearing stock sound effects of people screaming. And I don't think it was supposed to be funny, but it's honestly hilarious. Like, watch this. This is completely raw footage. I've heard that sound effect in like 3,000 YouTube poops. I know for a fact there's also a SpongeBob episode that uses it. Gotta love it. In another vision, a cultist tells Renee that her blood will be a great source of power for the Dark Savior, and she gets pretty upset, hinting that she has some kind of turbulent family history. Then you see one where Naomi's standing in a field of sunflowers, and they're so bright they kinda block out the text. She pretty much busts our balls for letting her be killed, saying she genuinely wished we came back to save her after the hybrid slapped her, but we didn't, and deep down she knew we wouldn't. Honestly, go off, I kinda deserve it. Kamiya makes an appearance too, with those damn sunglasses on. He's a bit more positive than Naomi was and tells us he's impressed with our progress, but shit's different now, and it's not about getting back to our normal life anymore. Kamiya says he's given his soul over to the Hive, and once the prince is back, there's no stopping him. The world will be turned to flames. He tells us to hurry up and merge with the hybrid so they can get started, and then leaves. Some of these visions involve people and concepts we're totally unfamiliar with, and are more tilted towards Renee. One of them features a guy named Bernard, who's her ex-boyfriend. He's kind of a manipulator, and acts like a victim when he talks. Renee gets angry at him for pouting and starts going on a tirade about how she's tired of her family as well as his. Then there's one with Renee herself. It's an alternate version of her from a timeline where she embraced her dark heritage. Her family possesses some sort of power comparable to that of the Hive, capable of drawing strength from the fear of others. Apparently, Renee's father, Lord Lorraine, tried to transfer this power to her, but she refused to be a part of the madness. I kinda wonder if it's vampires. I don't know why, that's just my gut instinct. Arguably the strangest one, at least visually, is with this guy Daryl. Daryl's a bit of an asshole and taunts Renee about her journalism career, but Renee has a sharp tongue herself and quips right back at him. Eventually, Daryl just says we're gonna die down here alone and starts cackling, ending the vision. The very last one I found features that which sways, who might not actually be a hallucination. It says it was born here in the mind of that which whispers, and gives voice to the memories within its soul. We're told that if we sacrifice all of the Nexus Stones at the pillars of the altar, the Hive will actually go totally dormant forever. Renee asks why it would even tell us that, and that which sways just says it's showing us our inner self. Well, I appreciate it. If you can survive this haunted house gauntlet of strange sights and sounds, you'll be met finally by that which whispers at the end, who laughs and congratulates us for overcoming the illusions. Renee doesn't take his attitude too kindly and calls him a big ugly lizard, which stuns the creature into silence for a moment before it remarks about how simple we are. That which whispers then hands us the final Nexus Stone, which we can use to reach the altar. This is the final showdown, and just like that which sways said, we gotta burn all 4 of these orbs and put the Hive to bed for good, or else the whole planet's gonna burn. As we walk in, Razzo appears and asks us to think about why the altar is here, who it's made for, who brought us here, and how we got here. He says we need to decide if we want to gain everything back or lose it all, and then vanishes. The place almost looks like the inside of a tree. There are branch-like structures coming out of the ground, and the floor seems to be some kind of dirt. After walking forward to the inner chamber, we're met by a monk who speaks silently. His lips move in the cutscene, but no sound comes out. It's like he's speaking telepathically. The monk recounts the story of the prince's essence being scattered across the earth, and reveals that this happened all the way back before life had even evolved yet. Humans were born of the prince's essence, and this essence is stimulated by fear. We are a walking goldmine of essence, and they just couldn't resist squeezing it for all it was worth. When we finally made it to the Hive, they came to realize that not only are we touched by the essence of the prince, we carry more of it than anybody else, and essentially are the prince. At least, we're his energy, and the hybrid is kinda like the shell. As the hybrid sits curled up on the altar, we're called to join with it and regain all that was lost. But then, Razzo busts in and starts taunting it, saying that it ultimately failed to regain the world. I wouldn't be so sure about that yet. I mean, we can't exactly fight back here, you know? Now this next part's nuts. The hybrid just nonchalantly decides to reveal that it can talk now. It confirms that Razzo is in fact that which leads, and essentially tells him to go fuck himself because his job's over. Razzo just brushes it off and says it was a mistake to come to Earth. In the entire history of the Old Ones, the Hive has never fallen so far. Razzo tells the hybrid that Earth has beaten the prince, and then warps us out of the room, to where the altar's power source is. And with that, it's time to finish the fight. What follows is a marathon run through 4 areas, 1 for each Nexus Stone, back to back. No breaks, no NPCs, just straight up, no holds barred, raw doggin', dungeon crawlin', while the hybrid goes all out in a last-ditch effort to reabsorb us. Remember how I said you might want to save some ammo for a tough spot coming up? It's been a minute, but this is it. There really aren't any places to hide here. You need to have your eyes peeled, your ears open, and your finger on the X button, ready to run at a moment's notice. As tempting as it is, I would not sprint through here unless you're actively being chased, because getting caught with no stamina is absolutely going to do you in. The first maze has some conveyor belts and staircases, but overall, it isn't too big. There's one spot where you have to jump off a conveyor belt halfway through, but that's the trickiest part. Now, as you go through, you're going to want to use 100% of your brain for a minute and try to memorize the exact path you take to the end. Why is that? Well, after you toss the first stone into the fire, you're brought directly to another maze. And guess what? It's the same layout, just a different color. Yeah, if you look at the map, they flip it in each one to try and trick you and make you think it's different, but it isn't. So if you memorize the steps of the first one, it's just rinse and repeat 3 more times. After the second one, you should have it down to a science, which minimizes the chance you'll get devoured in a corner somewhere. It's still a grind to do all 4 in a row, but knowing they're all the same helps. As soon as you toss in the 4th stone, the Hive dies instantly. The hybrid collapses, and all of the aliens back at the altar rot where they stand. Somehow still alive, I guess because he was made to be a human, Razzo applauds our work and says the Dark Messiah is no more, and the Hive will coalesce into stone like a fossil. He shouts for us to run to the elevator and return to the surface immediately before it's too late. Renee thanks Razzo and says he's kind of like a tricky little fairy, to which he responds by saying she has no idea how close she really is to the truth. Before parting, Razzo tells us he was the Tempter, a being of free will, and he's fine with our decision and looks forward to experiencing more of Earth. We board the elevator, which thank God actually does work, and the altar collapses as the Amaterasu fusion generator from the mesh falls through the floor and blows up literally everything. Finally back on the surface, Renee complains that all of her film has been ruined, and wonders what happened to the man she was with. And that's Hellnight. So, wait, we weren't up there with her? There's no way we died. We got on the elevator together. Maybe as soon as the door opened, our guy just dipped. I honestly have no idea. Hellnight was one hell of a game. It starts off strong with a unique premise and story that only gets more and more entertaining as you play through. There are some pretty repetitive gameplay segments that I wasn't a huge fan of, but the plot and atmosphere really stand out and carry it through, and I absolutely recommend you experience them firsthand. I honestly couldn't believe how much the events escalated. You go from running around in the sewers and mingling with criminals to talking to alien beings of psychic energy inside of cyberspace. I love sci-fi horror. That kind of thing is right up my alley. And the first time I played this, I had no idea just how far they went down that road. It was a lot of fun. To be honest, I don't think anybody could predict the events of that final act. It's just so imaginative, immersive, and strange. It's one of those things I kept thinking about even weeks after I finished it. For the life of me, I cannot understand how those official publications in Europe failed to see the creativity of this game on such a level as to give it shit like a 7 out of 100. It's not like I'm trying to beef with game journalists 2 decades after the fact. Everyone can have their own opinions, right? It just feels extremely harsh and maybe a little dismissive, like they didn't even really give it a chance. Before we wrap up, I did promise we would check out the other endings. You might be wondering if the ending we got with Renee could even be considered good because the fate of our characters completely left up in the air. Well, let's dive in for a minute. Hellnight has a total of 6 different endings, based on which partner you finish the game with. As much as I like this game, I don't have the endurance to play it and record it 6 times in a row and see everything, so footage for most of these is coming courtesy of PS1 Gamer Collector. Alright, so 3 of the endings are considered good: Naomi, Renee, and Ivanov. The other 3 are considered bad: Kamiya, That Which Wanders, and finally, no partner, finishing the game alone. Let's go through the bad ones first. We were well on our way to finishing the game with Kamiya. I honestly consider it a stroke of luck that the hybrid spawned in and killed him. So what happens in his route? You might remember that the further we went, the more hostile his behavior started to be. He also complained about having headaches and hearing a cat meowing. This only gets worse if he survives. He can potentially kill several more NPCs and becomes increasingly unstable. Kamiya is actually the only character who ends the game early if you have him. As soon as you reach the altar, he realizes the prince has been calling out to him since he was a child, and was even influenced by the Hive to become a serial killer. The cat he had been hearing was his first victim. You might also recall that when we met him in the bar, he said we weren't his prey, which is how the aliens talked about humans. Kamiya willingly offers himself and you to the hybrid, and the Hive wins, although you don't get to see exactly what happens after he touches the altar. This is the only ending where the aliens win, and I think I would have been kinda pissed off if I got it in the video. Let's check out That Which Wanders next. Believe it or not, yeah, he can be your partner too. You just have to get your current one killed at the Hive outskirts, I think right before his cutscene with the hybrid. This ending plays out much like the one we saw with Renee, except That Which Wanders decides to die with the Hive, explaining that it's his home. He tells you that he enjoyed his time with you and urges you to forget about everything that happened, and that's it. If you thought the idea of these creatures learning more about humanity and human emotions was interesting, this is a route you want to check out, although it pretty much starts right at the end of the game. Finishing the game alone is barely worth talking about. It's the same thing we already saw, except, well, nobody leaves with you, and Razzo doesn't tell you that he's the Tempter. Your character doesn't say much either, the credits just immediately roll after you leave the mesh. Not so great. As for the good endings, Naomi's ending is what I'd say is the hardest to get. For much of the game she has no weapon, and she can't help you fight back at all. Naomi does gain the ability to use psychic power to stun the monster very late in the game, but that means you have to go most of the time either making no mistakes at all or reloading every time you do. But to me at least, I think reloading after every mistake kinda kills the intrigue of the partner mechanic. If you keep Naomi the whole way through, you'll notice she swaps to an alternate personality every so often, just like we saw in Renee's route in the conversion room. A handful of route-exclusive cutscenes exist for Naomi that suggest she accidentally murdered some of her friends as a child with her psychic potential, and the second personality is some kind of trauma response, making her quite the ideal candidate to be harvested by the Hive. In Naomi's ending, she really wants Razzo to get on the elevator too and escape along with us. This makes him burst out laughing as he assures us he'll be able to find his own way out. The facility collapses as we leave, and both her and the protagonist are in the ending, notably different than with Renee. Naomi thanks you for your help and decides it would be best if we didn't tell anybody about what happened, saying that only we'd understand it. Then she excitedly looks forward to going home. We've already seen Renee's, so last up is Ivanov. This one's different. You can get Ivanov on your team if you show up to his fight with the hybrid with no partner. He packs a big-ass weapon and just feels cool to explore with. You know he's skilled, and he sometimes offers a government military type of perspective on different things in the mesh. It changes the game's tone a bit. In Ivanov's ending, he asks Razzo why he helped us stop the Dark Messiah, and Razzo says he wasn't helping us, then leaves. Okay. After escaping, Ivanov reflects on his mission to kill the hybrid and exterminate the xenoforms known as the Old Ones, declaring it a success. He recommends that the people he works for, a group called Organ, dispatch a research team to examine the remainder of the Hive and put together a full report. Not too bad of an ending. I actually think I like it more than Naomi's ending, although I'm not sure if the government getting their hands on anything from down there is really that good for the world. It beats being incinerated after the prince revives, I guess. Just like with Renee though, the protagonist isn't shown or mentioned after the elevator. It's super interesting that the only one that has that is Naomi's ending. For the dedicated player, it can't be denied there's a lot of replayability here, and even though I might have just summarized it all for you, you gotta try this game out. There's plenty of smaller dialogues to see, and some exclusive scenes in the conversion room to watch on each of the routes. Not so many people talk about Hellnight, so it'd be cool to see some fresh takes. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this one. But it'd be a shame to see Den Oezo go already. So we're gonna tackle another of their games. There was that one other horror game they worked on, remember? Desperia, released in the year 2000 on the Dreamcast. This one's a Japan exclusive, but let me tell you, you don't want to miss out on this game. It's another wild ride. It won't be too long before I get around to it, so keep an eye out. This has been the Hellnight Experience, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.